Hello, how is everyone doing? We're now in the Parnassus caves, if you remember, and in this episode we're going to be continuing deeper into them. We're going to be fighting a lot more monsters. We're going to be fighting more green arachnos, which stand out in this place, and all sorts of other creatures. And of course, as I promised, I will also be discussing the resistances mechanic of the game. So, if you have any questions at the end of it, feel free to leave me a comment or anything like that. And also, if you notice that I've made a mistake in any of it, just feel free to let me know as well, and I'll make sure to post annotation to correct it or something. But yeah, let's begin talking about resistances actually. As you notice, the resistances, they go up to 100%, and it's quite straightforward. That means obviously 0% means that you receive full damage from a certain element, and 100% means you're completely immune. For example, 100% fire resistance means you're immune to fire. And then we also got the negative. It can go into the negatives as well. So for example, at negative 100%, it means you'll be receiving twice as much damage from a certain element. So minus 100% fire resistance means you're going to be getting twice as much damage from fire. And from what I checked, there doesn't seem to be actually a cap on the lower end of it. Apparently, it's possible for if a monster reduces your resistance, they can actually reduce it for till infinite amount of downwards. So it could get really lethal really quickly. However, the top end does have caps. You have, as you notice, for the primary resistances, we have 80%, which is the cap, and that means no matter how much you try to put your gear and all this, you're not gonna get your resistance, primary resistances above 80%. You will always receive some damage from them. And actually the same is also true for the secondary resistances, secondary ones like stun and vitality and stuff, the ones you have on your second page. So secondary resistances, they're capped at 80% as well, even though they're displayed. Usually the display shows, it could show way over that. It could show like 150% stun resistance, for example. But it doesn't mean that you're gonna be completely immune to stun and beyond. There's actually not much point putting your resistances any higher than 80%, your secondary ones. Although the only reason you might want to do that is if, for example, you're going to be facing someone who does reduce your resistances, then if you have it way above the cap, it means even the reduction is not going to get it below the cap. For example, if you have 150% stun and someone reduces it by 50%, you're still going to have over 80%. So you still can withstand, above the cap. Of course, the resistance caps don't apply the same to you as they do to all the monsters. For example, the undead monster types and constructs, they have 100% resistances, complete immunities to things such as poison and bleeding and vitality and all sorts of life leeching damage types. So that means this stuff will not work on them. However, you can still reduce, if you're using resistance reducing stuff, you can still reduce the resistances to those sort of things. For example, if you use like your necrosis skill or the famously known Sapros the Corruptor, that can actually reduce the resistances below 100%. So you actually start dealing stuff like poison and bleeding damage to the undead, which is pretty amazing. Right, if you notice, we met some new monsters here, the Limos, and they're pretty dangerous, so you got to be careful with them. They actually do some massive life leech on you and can heal themselves in the process whilst draining health from you. Alright, we've reached here, this area where we're going to accomplish a side quest. We're going to kill this monster, Sephiris, Master of the Flame, and he's a boar man. He's a half pig, half man. Now that we've killed him, we're going to return to this Grieving Widow in Delphi. And yeah, boar man, that's quite a strange creation. Makes you wonder what sort of conception caused that. That man must have mated with a pig or something. Although it's not too unusual for the ancient Greece setting. I mean, if you know the Minotaur was an offspring of a woman making love to a bull. Yeah, I'm serious. I mean, if you don't believe me, you can check up on that. Right, so we're back in Delphi. We're gonna speak to this woman who wanted us to avenge her husband. Because we killed the pig that killed her husband. Literally. We've completed the side quest. Gonna just unload some of the stuff that we that we don't need. And let's get going. We still haven't finished talking about the resistances. Alright. Right, yeah, so continuing the resistances. If you notice, there will be some, of course, which you might think, what the heck is that? For example, sometimes you might come across stuff like elemental resistance. Like, what's elemental resistance? Well, elemental resistance, it means it's a resistance for the three main elements, so fire, cold and lightning at the same time. So for example, a piece of gear that gives you 30% elemental resistance, it will give you 30% to fire, 30% to cold and 30% to lightning, so it's pretty amazing. And then also, let's not forget the physical resistance. Physical damage is considered as a damage type of its own. And this is something you shouldn't be confused about, because it doesn't often say physical resistance, it just says damage resistance. It might say, for example, 15% damage resistance, and you think, what sort of damage is this? When it says damage resistance, it actually applies to physical. However, this not to be confused with damage absorption. Damage absorption applies to all damage types, whilst damage resistance is only to physical. So keep that in mind, right? Then we've got some other things as well. We've got stuff like stun resistance. You might be wondering, what's stun resistance? You don't get damage from stun. And stun resistance simply means the stun duration. So 80% stun resistance means your stun duration will be decreased by 80%. So you're not gonna be standing there with your head, spinning, and you're not being able to attack the monsters, because if you're stunned, it can be quite deadly, and the monsters could kill you. Also, there's something you should know, that the vitality resistance, the actual display that shows vitality, it actually includes life leech in it as well. Even though there are two types of resistance, there's life leech and there's vitality, they're completely different types of damage, although they're shown usually as the same. So sometimes you have to really check if you really need vitality resistance. You've got to check your pieces of gear that they're actually granting you vitality and not life leech resistance. Alright, and of course, I'll just mention that we know about the primary resistance and also secondary resistance, but there are actually also tertiary resistances that exist in the game, and they're really minor and they're usually not mentioned in your stats. But tertiary resistances include stuff such as slow resistance, entrapment resistance, sleep resistance, this kind of stuff you don't encounter so much, but it's still part of the game, so they exist as well. And yeah, also just to conclude that if you didn't know, in the epic and legendary difficulties, we get resistance penalties as part of the difficulty. In epic, all our primary resistances start at -40. This doesn't apply to secondary resistances, only primary ones. And then at legendary, they start at -100. So it starts off with giving you a handicap. However, by those stages of the game, the gear you find is really amazing. You get some gear which will give you 80% to all the primary resistances, so that pretty much balances out the entire penalty. So yeah, that's the resistances. I sure hope I didn't forget to mention anything else. And if you do have any questions in regard to them, then feel free to ask away. There's quite a lot to take in, and there's probably quite a lot of information, so hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Alright, so we're now meeting some Orthuses and some other creatures. And I actually promised I'll tell you someday about Orthus, so maybe I should tell you now. Orthus was actually a two-headed dog in mythology. It was actually a single entity. It wasn't a species, it was just one entity. And he was like a brother of Kerberos, and he was one of the offspring of the Typhon and Echidna. Yes, that is the same Typhon we get to fight at the end of the game. And Typhon was the daddy of quite a lot of monsters in Greek mythology. And yeah, Orthus was one of them. And Orthus was this two-headed dog which was helping a giant by the name of Geryon to guard his red cattle. And this was actually, as one of his 12 labors, Heracles had to get this red cattle, so he got to fight Orthus. And he managed to beat Orthus pretty easily, without really much of a sweat. Yeah, so that was a little story about Orthus there, and in the game we've got quite a lot of them. As you noticed, we're actually coming out of the Parnassus caves, finally. Take a breath of fresh air. And now we're in the fields and it's nighttime. It's pretty quiet. We're gonna be mugged by Maenads, so beware. And yeah, if you noticed, we fought a few lemurs back in the cave. And as I said, lemurs are quite dangerous with their life leech, especially if you notice they come in pairs, so you don't spread your damage too much, just concentrate on killing one of them. Because if you try to kill both at the same time, they will life leech you, and then they will heal themselves, and it'll take you ages to kill them. But yeah, I actually wasn't sure who Limos was in the mythology, so I checked up just before doing this episode. And apparently Limos was some kind of goddess, or more like a monstrous spirit that was resided in the underworld somewhere. And it was basically this spirit of hunger and starvation. So that's quite accurately depicted in the game as well. How they suck your life, because they're pretty much empty on the inside. Although yeah, just like Orthus, Limos in the mythology is a single entity as well, rather than an entire species of monsters. Oh, I don't know what happened to this Maenad over there. She doesn't seem to be attacking. That made me feel bad killing her actually now. Yeah, sometimes monster AI goes a bit weird, and sometimes you might come across an old monster who just doesn't attack you, just stands there, chilling out. Alright, we're just gonna go explore this cave, and I will actually skip a lot of parts here because there's actually nothing special here, just a few arachnos and that's it. And it looks pretty much identical to the cave we've just been in. And I'm sure you're sick and tired of seeing the same grey rocks. I'm surprised though, I'm not seeing green arachnos outside, I only see them inside caves. It's like, what kind of hunters are you guys? Like I said, you stand out. Alright, so we're out of this cave. Let's go back to fighting Maenads. It's still nighttime, although the sun should be rising any second now. If you notice, a lot of them actually got the Envenom enchantment, so if you're struggling, it might be a good idea to have some poison resistance here. Oh, there we go, level up. Yeah, we're just gonna find ourselves some nice place to hole up, and then we're gonna distribute all the points. But yeah, if you notice, the Maenads tend to be usually hunters. They're all using spears and bows for the most part, so piercing resistance against them is useful as well. You know, Maenads sort of remind me of these Navi species from the Avatar movie. Probably because they're just blue and lanky. Right, experience shrine here, so we're gonna tag that after we distribute the points. Let's distribute points now. So here we should probably get the Storm Mastery up to the tier 4, because it's just hanging there otherwise, and we are gonna get a lot in the 4th tier. Actually in the defense as well, but we're gonna get that straight after Storm, so let's get that up to the 4th tier. We're gonna put one more point later. Let's just put 1 point in the skills here. Adrenaline, that would be nice. Just for that occasional proccing, giving us some health regeneration. And I want to put 2 points in strength for the attributes, because we seem to be a bit low on strength, considering we pretty much fight most of the time. Alright, let's tag the experience shrine and go kill some more Maenads. And in the next level up, we're gonna be unlocking the 4th tier of Storm, and hopefully using some good skills, like I'm hoping to get the synergy to Squall and also synergy to Thunderbolt, and also hopefully we could pick up the Lightning Bolt and start dealing some serious lightning damage. Okay, if you see, we've explored this entire place, and it's already morning. We've been traversing the Parnassus caves throughout the entire night, and I thought I was alive there for a second. We're almost at the war camp, in fact. We've been poked so much by these Maenads and their poisonous spears. I'm surprised we're not kneeling down and throwing up all that poison in our blood system. Triple team. Alright, dealt with them all hopefully. No, one more. Die, bitch. There we go. There we go, now we've disposed of them, so now we're gonna be crossing a little bridge here. If you notice, there's a teleport which we're gonna activate, and also rebirth fountain. Look at that, the satyr trader. He's a well-tempered satyr. He doesn't want to fight, he just wants to sell some goods, sell some shit. Right, and I'll check with him in a bit, because I don't want to bore you with it. And I'll stop the episode around here. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about offensive and defensive ability and killing satyrs in the monster camp. Let's do this!